So these Mondays are always the same. They're either pouring rain or it's perfect sun, and you would rather be outside. But I don't think we can move the whole class outside, just space-wise. Okay, so this is the topic for today. It will be a long and winding discussion as usual. And as always, let's start from the beginning. So, ethics. What is ethics? How do you, what comes to your mind when you hear about ethics?
The
Yes.
story of human action.
The story?
The
study of human action. Yes. What do you mean by this?
It's a philosophical area.
Okay.
Which the main question is why and how does the human behave?
Okay, so it's a branch of philosophy asking the question of why and how do people behave. Yes, there is one more layer, which is, so we said that in epistemology, the main question was what is true, what is false, right? So is there a parallel question that you can apply to ethics? What is right and what is wrong? Okay, this is the key question of ethics. So, what are other features of ethics? Is it like epistemology? Is it something which is common to everybody? Is it something that changes depending on the field of application? Is it something that is constant? Is it something that changes over time? How does ethics look like? Yes?
It changes over time.
It changes over time. Can you give me an example of some ethical question that changed over time?
Yeah, I mean not really question, but the thing that I don't know 100 years ago the women cannot vote.
Yeah, voting rights for women is something which is, of course, an ethical question, because the question is it right or wrong that women should vote as much as men in the political discussion of our society? And the answer to this question changed in the space of a little bit more than 100 years. If you went to the beginning of in 1900, you would find a lot of countries where this was considered to be wrong. Now, I mean, at least in the Western society, this is universally accepted to be right. Okay, so there is a sense where this changes over time. There is also another sense whereby this is a collective process. Because in some sense we all agree in our societies that it is right that women should vote, or that it is wrong. But there is a collective agreement around this. Can you think of a parallel that applies to the individual? So what happens when you scale this down to the individual level? Yeah.
Do you mean like that you have to be 18 to vote or something like that?
Oh no, I'm thinking more about, so we talked about ethics as this branch of philosophy that guides us to what is right and what is wrong at a collective level. Is there an analog at an individual level, or what? So
Cheating on an exam.
sorry?
Cheating on an exam.
Cheating on an exam is something which is wrong on an individual level, but the ethical judgment, collective, is that this is wrong, right? So what happens when you scale this down to the individual level? Do you know this? There is a key word here, which is morals. Are you familiar with this term? Morals? So morals is something which is completely, let's say, downscaled to the subjective and individualistic level. We don't talk too much about collective morals. We talk about the moral compass of somebody, right? So in some sense, the morals is an instantiation of the ethics. You have a collective ethics and an individual morals, right? So, other ideas about ethics in general?
The abortion.
Abortion is a hot, let's say, an active ethical debate. So, why is it a debate now?
Because
You can see.
No, yeah, if you want to.
because there's not a standard whether it's right or wrong.
So, for an ethical question to be actual, there must not be a standard, right?
Yeah.
So this must be still an open question. So this goes in the category of open debates, like we were discussing about battles. But I'm asking you a deeper question, which is, why now? Why are we having a debate about abortion now, and we're not having it in the 1930s? Take your time to think. I saw you, but I want to go back to the idea of the women's rights. Why do you think the women's rights movements happened when they happened, and they didn't happen in the 1600s or in the 1300s? Yeah.
Because back then the society was based on, I don't know, battles and brute force. And
Sorry?
The society was based on battles and brute force. not
Okay,
on thinking.
so even before, so if you go much before, if you go to the Middle Ages, if you go to these parts, there was no democracy, and wars were much bigger and on a larger scale, right? So of course, voting was not a debate there, not even for men, right? But why did the question of women arise at the beginning of the 1900s? Yeah.
Isn't it because of the wars? I mean, women had to do a lot of things they didn't used to do. And this is because they got used to making these things and wanted to, after the wars, wanted to make sure that they can do these things too.
So there is, I try to paraphrase, there is a level through which the society changes, and the role of women also changed with this. So it made sense that the context acknowledged that since the role of the women changed and became more equal to the one of the men, well, because for one thing, women didn't work before. They were just doing housework. They were not producing GDP, let's say. Well, now it was clear that women were doing this as well as men. So this became a matter of equality, right? So did you get some idea about why is abortion a topic now?
Yes, because in the past, women has no power to decide whether they want to do the abortion.
Okay, in the past, women didn't have the decision of whether they want to do the abortion or not. But there is one more thing. Could women have a painless abortion 100 years ago? Was there a pill that allows you to have an abortion?
No technology to do it.
The technology enables
Yes.
new ethical debates. It raises new ethical questions. And this is about the physical technology. It's about the pill that creates, new societal contexts. As much as, the Industrial Revolution creates a societal context where voting rights become, again, a matter of ethics. So, let's just look at some key points. I just put these here because I was worried I might escape, I might lose these. Okay, philosophy of what is right and wrong, it's okay. There is a collective dimension, as we said, changes over time, we have seen some examples, and then ethics helps us express value judgments. What do you think this means? What is a value judgment in general, and what do you think this means? Yes?
To evaluate whether a decision is right or wrong.
Yeah, it helps us evaluate whether a decision is right or wrong, and so the decision is attached to some sense of a value, right? But if you go back to when we were giving the very first definition of innovation, we were saying that innovation is this way that allows you to change the truth value of a statement, right? So there is this transformative element, and it's about value. And it's about generating value in the sense, especially related to entrepreneurship, in the sense that I generate economic value most of the times, right? Or social value, we'll see today. But ethics is in some sense something that is another dimension that allows us to formulate these value judgments, that allows us to state whether we see something as valuable or not. So whether we see, for example, a business venture as relevant or not. Because it might generate a lot of money, but if it is ethically unacceptable, nobody will ever want to do this. So it will not generate value. Right? So, why do we care about ethics in a course of innovation and entrepreneurship, aside from the reason that I just told you that, you know, something ethically unacceptable, people won't put the money there, even though some people will, maybe. Why do we care about ethics in a course of innovation, entrepreneurship, business, ICT? Why ethics? Yeah, please.
Sometimes the innovations and the business or startups revolutionize the entire aspect, like an example for Uber. Uber on some state near destroy the entire taxi categories, and so a lot of people's that's probably pay the license a lot. After in like 4 or 5 months, they don't have half of the standard works.
Right. So you're talking about the case of Uber. So let me first draw a general conclusion, because innovation is disruptive, and disruption brings out change, also in our ethical values. I saw you. I'll give you a word in a second. Is it about Uber? Do you want to elaborate more, or another? Okay. So if you take the case of Uber, this tells you very clearly why this is a matter of value judgments, because the license of the taxi driver is attached to a value. In the moment in which I have a disruption, like Uber, allowing people without a license to drive people around, then suddenly the value of that license changed. So I need to make a judgment that allows me to discern, is this right? Is this wrong? Okay? So it was a very good example, thank you. Yes?
We can say we are innovating in guns like this.
Okay.
More. So is it ethically good?
So, innovation in warfare, which allows more efficiently to kill people, is this right or not? This is also an ethical question. Yes, in the back?
It's because if you have an idea of something that is innovative, then to consider the ethical aspect of the people who sell your product.
Okay, I will challenge you just a bit. So you're saying, if you have an innovative idea, you have to consider the ethical aspects. But my question is, why do you have to consider the ethical aspects?
Because maybe your customers don't appreciate your product because of the ethic that of your product, of your idea.
So customers, thank you, might make a decision on your product based on their ethical values. So we go back to the idea of value judgments. Okay? Yes?
With business, it helps you to maintain a reputation.
In business, it helps you with maintaining reputation, for sure. We will talk at the very end about something which is called corporate social responsibility, which ties to this idea very much. Then, why else? Why do we talk about ethics? So, this morning, while I was looking for more material to give you to read and to go deeper and so on, I found this book, which is called Computer Ethics. 1985 is the first edition, okay? And I was reading on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is some reference which I gave you a bunch of times, that there is this need to talk about computer ethics, okay? And there is this, it's not just about general ethics. The computer adds one more dimension. What do you think this dimension is? So far, we have been talking about ethical judgments and ethical problems related to products, okay, physical artifacts. So the idea of the abortion pill, the idea of the guns, the idea of a product which has attached to it some judgment, of actions, voting rights, is it right or is it wrong to do a certain action, to allow a certain action, and so on. But the realm of ICT, the realm of computers, brings about a third point, a third element, which is,
Makes easier to steal stuff, like copy, piracy.
Exactly, but it makes it easier to copy, to do piracy, to infringe author rights. So in other words, what is this about? What is the, yes?
Cyber crimes.
It's about cybercrime, of course. But cybercrime is about stealing what?
Intellectual property.
Intellectual property, which is a form of information.
Rights of others.
Rights and information. So, the realm of ICT creates a third class of ethical problems. Ethical problems related to information, which then go into privacy, they go into rights, they go into intellectual property, they go into a number of branches. But this becomes about information. So we're not talking about artifacts. We used to have these since the dawn of times. We're not talking about actions. We used to have this since the dawn of times. But we're talking about information at a scale, which we didn't have before. So what are other elements that make this ethics in the ICT, in the computing, let's say, world particularly problematic? So we're talking about information. So what is special about information?
People don't realize how much power they give to corporations by giving their information.
People don't realize how much power information entails. So how much power they're giving away to a corporation when they're not properly securing this information. This is for sure one example, one very clear point. What else? Yeah.
How to use this information.
So how to use the information and what do you mean?
For example, you can use it in a bad way, predicting something that people will take the human rights from them, or using it in a good way to helping people do something.
Right. So even some technology which is predictive, any predictive technology that leverages information to create new information can be used in a good way or in a bad way. And this before was not a possibility, because if I have an artifact or if I have an action, this refers to the possibility of doing this now, but not of predicting. So in this sense, information creates an option of having some sense of a speculative dimension to this ethics. What else? There was one more idea there. Yeah, there?
There is an element of digital divide, the access to computing power.
There is an element of digital divide, which means not all people have equal access to these technologies, which are bringing about this disruption. So these ethical concerns are not just different from parts to parts of society, but they're also different from in terms of economic power. Can I afford to be into this world or not? What else?
The idea of fake news.
Sorry?
The idea of fake news.
The idea of fake news. We've been talking about this a bit more, I think, in the class of IBICT. But fake news at a scale is something which is empowered and enabled by technology. Without technology, it's gossip. And usually I can falsify gossip pretty easily if I'm in a small surrounding. Or it becomes a myth, a legend. But fake news, the idea that I can have a pseudo-authoritative piece of information which is actually false and hard to falsify, is for sure a son of the digital age. Yes, what else? You were raising your hands before? Or yeah.
For information, it's hard to quantify.
So it's hard to quantify, and it's hard to qualify, because there is not just a matter of amount, there is also a matter of attaching value judgments to information. It's harder because it's a problem that as human beings we have been approaching only recently, right? So these are all things about the ethics of computing which are non-trivial, which create a new additional problematic dimension. All of these things, you see them in artifacts and you see them in actions as well. But when you move to the realm of computing, they become more problematic. They become more tangible. You start seeing them more concretely. So let's have some examples of ethical problems and possible answers to ethical problems in the realm of ICT and all of this. Yes?
One thing?
Yeah.
I think this is not a new dimension, because if we look at this power part, we will see that these are all related to the power. For example, technology will bring the power to people, so people can use ethics to how to manage that problem.
So you're
It's not a
saying,
new dimension.
I just amplify, you're saying this is not a new dimension because in the end this is about power. So in some sense I add this, it's about actions. It's about what actions you can do. So it's not really a new dimension, it's a reframing and it's an amplification, but it's not a new thing. So I agree, but this is an active debate. In the literature about computer ethics, this is an active debate. Is computer ethics and is ethics of information a new field or not? I don't want to present to you just my opinion as a pure thing, but some are saying that it is. Some are saying that it is not. If you read here, well, you will have the slides, and I need to, as usual, to make longer explanation for the non-attending students. But if you read here, the positions, this is a question which has been active since the 40s. Is this a new field or not? Is this a new question or not? And there are different positions, and it's still open as a question. So definitely. Right. So what are examples of ethical problems, especially in the realm of ICT, computer science, innovation, and so on, that you think? And what are the possible answers that you can give to them?
Privacy.
Sorry?
Privacy.
Who is it? Just because, okay, yeah, privacy. Okay, can you give me one concrete example about privacy and of a problem about privacy and possible answers?
One problem can be information secrecy.
Okay, one tangible problem, like just really practical, like I don't know, Facebook owning my data, whatever. Just very concrete example.
Facebook owning my data.
Okay, that was very creative. So.
I don't know what's up if they write you a message. Is it fair that somebody else can
Okay. Okay, let's take this message of this example of the message on WhatsApp. What are the possible answer to this? Because this, for example, you will see is, well, the current answer is not yes or no. It's something in the middle. So what are the possible answers that you have seen historically implemented?
Well, now WhatsApp has implemented the encryption for what I know.
Right, they have implemented encryption, but they have one thing. So the possible answers to this is, of course, a trivial yes, I can read what you're writing. A trivial no, I cannot read what you're writing. But there is a third answer, which is the one which is adopted now. There is encryption, but authorities can read or no. This is not the case. Or even though this is another possible answer. No, but authorities can request special access to read it. Okay, this is another possible answer. But yes?
They can know who you're talking to.
Yes.
Not what, but who.
They know who you're talking to and when. In other words, they're keeping metadata. So metadata represents one way to solve this dilemma, because the implications of each answer go into creating different types of value. Because if I can read your messages, well, I can do better advertisement, I can do better, I can balance better my services to know when you're writing, how much you're writing, blah, blah, blah. If I don't do this, I treat this as completely transparent, I don't look into any statistics, I have big problems. With this third way, actually it turns out that they can extract a lot of value out of this information without reading the exact messages that you're sending. So it's some sort of in the middle, but it has implications. The idea of the authorities being able to read messages is something that was very active. You remember with the case of the iPhone that was not possible to be opened. Is there a backdoor? Is there not a backdoor? What should we do? Should there be backdoors or not? And you see that each of these answers opens the door to a set of implications and closes it to some else, to some other ones. So, okay, this was one. Other ethical problems in ICT technology? Yes?
Also, one of the major problems, I think, is copyright infringement, where currently people, they don't have credibility to the work they do, photographers, musicians, because with ICT, you easily share forward and access for them.
Okay, so copyright is another ethical problem, which is here, which is the recognition of some remuneration or at least attribution of the work of artists and people that generate creative original work, right? So how do we regulate this is an open question. We have a huge number of different positions in this. Actually, this was one of the topics of the battle of last year. And it was very interesting because you remember last year there was this big debate about the EU reform of copyright. Article 11, Article 13, the link tax, the liability of platforms versus the liability of the users. This was a huge debate. Do you remember this? Okay, good. Who heard of this before? Who did not? Who did not? Okay, a few. So I will just give you a very brief overview. Last year, the Parliament ratified new guidelines for copyright, which state that there were two especially controversial points. One is the so-called link tax, which says basically if I am a website and I put a link to another external resource, I should pay this external resource every time my user click on your link. Very simply. The other point was a point that was shifting the responsibility of things such as copyright infringement from the individual user to the company, to the platform, to the service provider. Which means if I upload copyrighted material on YouTube, now YouTube takes me down, they give me a slap on the hand, and they say, you are nasty, okay? If the company wants, they can try to sue me to get, I don't know, some legal fees, but this is not practical. The proposal of the EU is to escalate this to a company level through a set of filters, was the proposal, that says basically, well, if I upload on YouTube a copyrighted video, this is a problem of YouTube. So, you know, Sony will be able to sue YouTube for unlawfully distributing content. And this created a huge outrage in all of the internet community because they were siding with the platforms. They were siding against this idea. This legislation was ultimately passed, and I have to say, funnily enough, okay, let's do a quick poll here. So, let's take this last point on the responsibility. So you can be either in favor of this or against this. Is it clear what the position is, or do I need to explain it better? Clear? Who thinks it's clear? Just to know. Okay, let's have a quick poll, very quickly. Are you in favor or against? So those in favor, raise your hands. So those that want the responsibility to go to the platform, raise your hands. Those that want the situation to remain the same as it is now, raise your hands. Okay, very funnily enough, aside from the fact that some people did not vote, but it's okay because I was not spending too much time also explaining this. This was the same situation last year before the battle. After the battle, everybody voted to shift the blame to the platforms. So, and these are students which are basically like you, in the sense that they're not the same, of course. You are always much better, much smarter, much nicer, of course. But they were, you know, decent students as well, right? But the point is, what I urge you to think is think a bit deeper, because it turns out all these people in the end said no, the platforms should start paying. Okay. So try to dig a bit deeper, because you see the possible answers are many. Okay, other ethical dilemmas. So we talked about privacy, we talked about copyright. What else? Yes.
Well, for example, we have different communities, and each community has different constraints and culture on the post or anything that being published on the internet. So when the community or one of the individuals post something out of the culture or what's known in the community, so maybe this will generate an ethical problem in the community.
Right. So you're saying, I think you're tying this also to a legislatory aspect, where, so he's saying, when somebody from a specific culture publishes on the internet some information which is normally considered not acceptable in that context, what should happen to this information, right? So the answers are many. Maybe I should allow to see it only from one place. Maybe I should just allow everybody to see this. No, don't allow anybody. The country where the person comes from takes priority. Where the server is hosted takes priority. You know, there are a gazillion of these problems. So this is relevant. Currently there are a number of answers, but there is no unique and well-defined answer, right? What are other problems? Even more subtle problems. Yeah.
Whether self-driving car can run on public streets.
This is a classic one. Self-driving cars. Are they allowed to drive on public streets? And how should they drive themselves? What happens if they're about to go on an accident? Okay? This is the classic that everybody likes to talk about. Oh, if I need to do an accident, do I kill the small girl or do I kill the old lady? Okay, it's never an old man or a young boy. It's always a small girl or an old lady. But, you know, this is always the example. Yeah, right?
The generalized question of this is, are we allowed to give the permissions to the machine to take action or not?
So, the generalized problem is, are we allowed to give to the machine permission to take actions or not? Actions which are potentially destructive, right? Which are life-threatening. Yes?
Problem could be, can internet access be considered as a...
Sorry, I just stay, yeah, I will go back on this in a second. I will just want to stay on this for a few moments. This, in part, is a closed question, because there are many examples. We had a battle with the ID basics on trusting the man versus trusting the machine. And I will draw some conclusions about this also here. But we are already allowing the machine to take control of some of our actions. So we've seen with the ID basics, we've seen the example of Tinder. With the IBICT, we've seen the idea of actor network theory and designer's intent, and I will go back to this in a moment. But the technologies shape what we can and we cannot do. Airplanes, in this example, in this case, are a great example. Because with airplanes, you cannot override the autopilot in many airplanes anymore. And this creates problems, because if the sensors don't go well, or if there is a situation with the designer of the autopilot didn't foresee, the human pilot cannot take control anymore. Even more so, human pilots are not trained to pilot an airplane without the autopilot anymore. There was a very famous case of a plane landing in the Hudson River in New York after a flock of geese entered one of the engines of the airplane. The pilot had to land on the Hudson River and saved something like 300 lives. He was able to do this because he was a veteran of a war where he had to drive the airplane, to control the airplane fully manually. So he knew how to fly the airplane. If he was civilly trained, he wouldn't have been able to react to this. Okay? So the question of what is the degree of control that we should give to a machine is a key question. There are many possible answers that are also attached to different costs, to different cost levels. So then you had another one? Yes?
Yeah, the problem of considering internet access as a human right.
So considering internet access as a human right is a problem, is a debate which is going on now. So what are the possible answers and what are the problems related to this, according to you?
Yeah, the answers are
well, yes, no, okay.
Right, no, okay, and the problems are giving, of course, access to everyone in the world, which also needs a lot of technical.
There's a cost in developing infrastructure,
yeah.
But there is also one more very tangible problem. Some places might not be ready for this socially. So I think it's under the eyes of everybody that we, at least in my opinion, and somebody will contradict me, but we are not ready for the so-called social media. We are not able to parse these things properly, and they're creating a lot of noise which people are unable to filter. Hence, we have fake news, we have a lot of these phenomena. So, if you have the idea that internet access is a human right, you might take a country which doesn't even have computers now, or that has a limited access to computers. Suddenly, everybody has access to the internet. What happens there? Yes?
Related to the other question, is the government has the right to block some sites?
So, government censorship on the internet. If something is illegal, but it is on the internet, should the government ban it or not? Or should it keep it public? It's interesting because this book, which again I retrieved this morning at 1 p.m. before going for pizza, first page, okay, Well, first, this book has a number of chapters which are called scenarios, which is incredible. But the first chapter is about banning somebody from doing something not ethically acceptable in an RPG, in an online role-playing game. So, about censorship, banning unacceptable behavior. Other ideas that fit into here? Yes?
You can say colonizing Mars.
Yeah, colonizing planets or these type of things, these are more action and artifacts-oriented problems, but they are still related to technology. If I have this ability, can I do this? Or how much should I feel free to alter? You know, like you know that I like reading a lot of science fiction. There is, for example, a situation which is very interesting in a comic book called Valerian, which is a French comic book from the 70s, where they colonize a planet, and the rule that everybody agrees upon is you can colonize any planet which is not inhabited by intelligent life forms. Okay? So if there's just plants and beasts, I can colonize it. So humans find a new planet, they colonize it, and 4,000 years after, and they developed everything, a spaceships come back and they say, oh yeah, we went for a short trip. We're coming back to our planet. Where, I mean, why are you here? Right? And this is, of course, an open question. So you can say I can define policies, but policies will not save us from ethical questions. So, what, at this point, after we have seen all of these things, what are the elements, what are the things that can make an innovation good or bad? Are there some key elements that allow us to stay on the side and to err on the side of good, or not? Or maybe everything is neutral.
Depends on what ethical problems it addresses.
Okay, it depends on what ethical problems it addresses. It's the "it depends" answer. So, can you elaborate a bit deeper?
Yeah. Okay, it is an ICT innovation about what we just talked about. So, information system problems. We have to be sure that it doesn't follow a bad path, which is more accepted, or because if it is still an open debate, then you cannot say it is good or bad.
Right. So, for sure, the first thing we should do is that once we know there are ethical questions, we should at least address those ethical questions. Then we cannot say how it will move on, but at least we should have answers, or at least we should have questions which are active now and which I can see now. Right. So, what are other elements that make an innovation good, bad, neutral, whatever? Yes?
I think we can only decide retroactively. So after some time, because when we make an innovation, we cannot be sure how it will affect.
So there is for sure a retroactive and a retrospective element, because when we make something, we do not know where it will go, right? So given this, how would you act? What do you think is the wisest course of action?
To make sure that it's not causing too much damage.
Well, first, the immediate, to make sure that I cannot cause too much damage. But then, if damage happens, what do you need to do?
Create new policies to avoid.
I need to be able to quickly update the policy that I have to avoid this mistake from repeating and from escalating. So there is an element of being able to flexibly address these problems as they develop. Okay. I want to move to this question just because it's related. Is technology neutral? So let's have again a poll. Who here thinks that technology is neutral? So it's neither good nor bad. It depends on how you use it. Okay? Who thinks this? Okay, who thinks technology is not neutral, but it's, it can be good or bad? Okay, it's interesting because I'm with the minority here as well. So, why do you think technology is neutral? of those that, yes?
Technology means the machines, which of course there's no mind to decide and take decisions and evaluate the ethics problems, where the human has of course the ethics evaluations.
Okay, so you're saying the machine itself does not have a mind to make ethical decisions. It's the human that has a mind to make ethical decisions. So I consider the machine to be neutral. I consider the human behind the machine, if anything, to have, to be partial, to be biased in some way. Okay, other ideas about this?
I think that technology can only be created with a motivation, and it can be either good or bad, not neutral.
So, technology can only be created with a motivation, and this motivation can be good or bad. It's hardly ever neutral. So, okay, other ideas? Yes?
I think it's quite relative speaking, is it good or not? Because if a new technology is introduced, it will bring change. For example, like laboring, like machine factories. Before, probably there are many workers working on that, and then a new machine like introduced. These people will lose jobs. But on the other hand, in the long term, it will increase the productivity and will create more job opportunities in other fields.
Right. So what you're saying is technologies might have ambivalent outcomes, because when I'm automatizing a factory, for example, my main driver might be that of optimizing the production, to making everything more efficient. But I will have the side effect of making people lose jobs. This is the so-called perspective of technological unemployment. Okay? Maybe I can give you a reading about this as well. But there are many possible answers to this idea of technological unemployment, and this now, in the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years, are especially tied to the field of AI. So once AI starts being more, better, faster, cheaper, and more pervasive, what will happen to the majority of workers? So it turns out that the answer is that historically we have had 3 or 4 already scenarios where we thought technological unemployment was behind the corner. But it turns out that new job sectors were created. So the first wave of technological unemployment, the most obvious one, I just pointed to 2 of these, is the transition from farming work to industry work, to factory work. So when we had machines that were able to automate farming or to mechanize farming, and 90% of the population was working in farming, you have a problem, because now you suddenly have all these farmers without a job. It turns out that they were able to transition relatively smoothly to being factory workers. The second step came from the transition from blue collar to white collar. So the transition from factory workers to office workers. And this, again, was a relatively smooth transition. So it turns out that this idea of the technological unemployment is, according to some people, very grounded and very real, because these previous examples don't tell us about what is about to happen now. And the argument of these people is mostly, well, it turns out that still we were always asking people to do machine tasks. From farming to factory to office, we're still asking them to do things which are algorithmic. That's the point. So once we are completely able to replace this algorithmic element by the means of a machine, then we will have a real problem. This is one position. Another position is the one that says, well, it's true, but we cannot know what will be the next step. Maybe the next step is something that now we don't think of as algorithmic. But once we start doing it, we will see that we will have another machine, a super machine, however you want to call it, that will be able to replace that work as well. So for now, for example, we see creativity as something which is not possible to be replaced by machines. But maybe one day we will be able to create creative machines. So we'll have one more step in the recursion. And then from there we will go who knows where. For sure, nobody had the idea when the first industrial revolution happened that we would be office workers, knowledge workers. The idea of a knowledge worker was probably, I mean, absurd, right? You needed to produce physical items. Okay. Other points of view about the neutrality of technology? Okay, I want to move to another question then, which is related. Do you think there is such thing as an emotional machine? Yes, no, and why? So let's see who thinks that machines are emotional.
Sorry.
Yeah?
Can you define the term better?
So, how do you define an emotional person? How do you define if something has emotions or not? It's perfectly fine. This actually was hoping for this question. So yeah. How do you define if somebody has emotion or not?
I don't know how to explain. It's kind of obvious.
Okay, it's kind of obvious, but exactly because it's kind of obvious, it's very much interesting. It turns out most obvious things are the ones that get more interesting once you ask questions about it. So just try to think of ways in which you attribute something an emotion. Okay? Take an emotion, take anger. Okay? How do you define if somebody is angry?
I don't know, or the things that are doing, maybe he's like, I don't know, throwing chairs or whatever.
Right, so you're basing this on the way this person acts. So you're basing it on his actions, which are, however, filtered by your perception. Right? So you are defining if somebody is angry, or if somebody is tired, or if somebody is happy by your perception. So this is, let's take this as a good definition of emotional behavior, okay? With this, I ask you the question, can a machine be emotional?
I think when someone acts based on an emotion, he often acts irrationally.
Okay, I take this, when somebody acts based on emotion, they act irrationally. I will go deeper into this idea because I think it's there is something more to this. Okay.
I think what he's trying to say is that when you're emotional, you are not using the common sense.
Okay, when you are emotional, you're not using common sense. Okay, so how do you? Okay, what do you call common sense then? Just because it's an interesting element.
I mean, common sense is defined because we are in a democracy by
Yeah.
the majority of people. Perspective over, I don't know, certain matter.
Okay, so you're saying common sense in some sense expresses the will of the majority, the will of the common. So this, however, goes into the loophole of the so-called tyranny of the majority. But, okay, let's keep it there. It's okay, let's keep it there. All right, so more answers to this, more reactions to this? Yeah?
No, I don't think machines can be emotional because by now the machine learning algorithm do the decision by statistically.
Okay.
They learn from the data they have and fit the distribution of data and then predict something they don't have from the distribution they established.
Okay.
So I don't think they can be emotional.
So you're saying, I just amplify again, machines cannot be emotional because machines work on statistics,
Yes.
right? So they're just taking a decision based on the previous data that they have and some rules that they're following, right? So this is not emotion, this is a statistical analysis.
I don't know. I think for me, I think the ability of every programmer can have a machine emotional intelligence in a way. If everybody can, if one programs it in a way that it can do gestures and all these things, it can qualify to be emotional intelligence.
So, what you're saying, the programmer can embed some emotional intelligence and some emotion in the way that he codes the machine.
I would define an emotion as an unconscious and uncontrolled reaction to stimuli. And from the fact that a machine not has something uncontrolled, so it cannot experience emotions.
Okay, so you're defining emotions as something which is an uncontrolled reaction to stimuli. You're saying a machine does not have something which is not uncontrolled. Therefore, it cannot be emotional. So, I am sorry I didn't take note of all the things that you said, because I think for each and every one of them, we would be able to construct an interesting counter-argument. Yes?
I think that if we are talking about irrationality, we are talking also about uncertainty, and we can definitely insert uncertainty in machines. So it's possible that machines are irrational, and I believe that they can be emotional.
Okay, so you're saying when we're talking about rationality, we're talking at some point also about uncertainty. I can embed a reasoning about uncertainty in a machine, and if it is this uncertainty that makes people behave emotionally, a machine in this sense behaves emotionally as well. Okay, I want to try to give you this perspective. Of course, yes?
There's a really interesting question if we can model the human brain with all the physical laws that we know, then with a powerful machine we could simulate a human brain and then have emotions.
Exactly. This is another argument, which is a thought experiment, which says if I can take the current understandings of physics that we have about how the human brain works, and we think that emotions are a product of the human brain, if I can replicate the human brain one-to-one with a sophisticated enough machine, then I can also create emotions. Therefore, the machines would have emotions. Yeah?
Yes, the fact that we can make a machine with an uncertainty, I don't know, because the uncertainty that we introduce on the machine in a sense is also a randomic thing in a machine. In general, it's not very randomic because there is something that causes something else. So
okay, so you're saying
create something really independent from this.
Okay, so you're saying uncertainty is an expression of randomness.
Yes, but randomness in a computer does not exist.
But randomness does not exist in a computer. Okay, so it's hard to program a machine which is uncertain because the machine would need to be random, which is not possible. This is what you're saying?
More or less, yes.
Okay, I'm just trying to parse it because it's... Okay, I want to take all of these contributions, and I hope that the people that are taking notes will be able to take notes about these, because there's a lot to talk about this, and I think if each of you research more into these questions, you will find a lot of interesting points. But I give you one possible interpretation of this. Of course, there's a lot of semantics, okay? How you define words, the meaning that you ascribe to words, and so on. I want to tackle 2 or 3 key points. First, the idea of acting rationally, okay? We define acting rationally as something which in some sense follows the best rules of reasoning that we know at the moment, right? But we know that the rules of reasoning that we know at the moment are the best now. They're not the best tomorrow. So, the fact that a machine acts rationally, at least in my opinion, is not really valid, because it is just acting based on the models that we have now. So it's not acting without emotion. It is acting with the emotions that we embedded in the reasoning, in the models of reasoning that we ascribe to it. You see what I mean? Okay, let me try to explain this again. We say rational is the best decision-making model that we have at the moment. Okay? However, we also know this is not final. Tomorrow, we will have a better decision-making model. This has happened always in the past. I don't think it will not happen in the future. We will have better models. So, because this is not the best model, it is, by your definition, irrational, and therefore emotional. Did you see what I did? Yes?
No, I mean, it's according to nowadays common sense, it's not emotional at all.
It is not emotional at all, according to nowadays common sense.
Yeah.
Exactly. I will get to what the problem is in the nowadays common sense and the clash between the nowadays common sense and the formalized models. And I will get to this in a moment. Okay? But what I'm saying is, what I'm underlining is this aspect. The aspect is of thought is evolving. And in the moment in which we have a clash between two different models of thought, purely rational behavior, whatever that means, is an illusion. I will give you a much more concrete example. So let's go back to the idea of designer's intent, okay, coming from actor network theory. So I will just very quickly summarize it. The idea is that every object has a function, and in its function, it reflects the intent of the person that designed it. The safety belt for driving, actually even more. The annoying beep that goes when you do not fasten your seatbelt before turning on your car very clearly shows the designer's intent of you should bloody fasten your seatbelt before starting driving, otherwise I'm going to nag the hell out of you and make it for you impossible to drive. Effectively prescribing you what I think is the ethically correct answer. You should drive with a seatbelt because crashes might happen. There is the paper of Latour. If you have not read it, you should by the 15th of January or whatever. So, just giving you an advance. So, objects embed a designer's intent. Machines, algorithms, are not any different. They embed the intent of the people that designed them. Very hardly, as it was said before, somebody is going to make a technology by saying, oh, I will make a neutral technology. Nobody will say this. When they make a gun, they make a gun because they want to kill people. When they make a social network, they make a social network because they want to connect people. Hardly ever it happens that there is no designer's intent. If there were no designer's intent, we would have no designed object. It would be a meaningless object. So there is always this designer's intent happening somewhere there. Yes?
The way the designer sees an object is not the same as the user sees the object.
The way the designer sees the object is not the same that the user uses the object. And this mismatch is the one that creates the ethical problems. So this is, again, remember we are exploring questions. So I'm not giving answers, we're exploring questions. So this is the key question.
In mathematics, people don't know what the rules they invent can do.
In mathematics, people don't know what rules their reasoning or what effects their reasoning will have. This is what you're saying?
Yes, so they don't have the intent.
So mathematical rules don't have an intent. Well, I would ask a mathematician, but even if we take this, I will show you one understanding of why, in spite of this, it is still problematic. Okay? So just hold this thought for a minute. So, we're talking about, in some sense, biased intents. Alright? So, intents of the designer which bias a technology, a machine, an algorithm, something. And we're talking about how to remove those biases. Because we're still attached to this idea of the neutral technology. So, I had a swap in the slides. Let me push this further. Let me go to this idea, which is actually an idea that came to me last week at a conference. Was explained to me, and I think it is very clearly tells you what we have been discussing so far. Kant, you know Kant, German philosopher, 1700s, late 1700s, okay? It's in some sense the connection between the Enlightenment and Romanticism. So this person, Fiorella Operto, she is a professor and she is the president of an association in Italy that is called Scuola di Robotica, School of Robotics, and her field of research is what she calls robo-ethics, the ethics of robotics. And she says a key problem in the robo-ethics domain starts from the idea that there is a pipeline of thought that goes from Kant to ISO. ISO are the standards, ISO standards. Philosophy influences society and politics. Politics influences policy. Policy creates standards. Standards inform how you design objects. So there is a clear pipeline that goes from philosophy to engineering. The problem is that this pipeline takes time. So, if we go from Kant to ISO, by the moment in which we have standards, the philosophy, the common sense, will be somewhere else. And now I have an artifact which is designed according to a common sense, which is no longer common. And here I have a clash. And here is where ethics needs to be explored. So, let's take a small break of 10 minutes, and when we reconvene, we go deeper into this, okay? I think this is one of the topics which I see, in general, you seem to be most interested, or at least I'm hearing many people contributing about this. So, my encouragement, again, is this, which is based, we said it a number of times, but maybe it's worth it to say once again. These classes are a starting point. This is why we're giving you one class on a different topic every time. We could do a course on each of the classes that we are delivering. We could do a full course on ethics, we could do a full course on business modeling, on venture financing, on epistemology, on open and closed innovation, on everything that we are doing. These are starting points. So, our hope is that with what you have here and the notes that tell you all the different threads which are left open from these classes, you are able to go deeper. So, we will continue now with one practical application of this idea, but it cannot stop here, okay? So, we talked about this idea of having this clash between two, let's say, models of ethics and two models of reasoning, because this pipeline from the philosophy to the standards, from this philosophy to the application takes time. And once these two elements meet, they have a level of dissonance, which we cannot address structurally. So, in the class of the IMD basics, we spoke about this idea of trusting the man or trusting the machine in one of the battles. But the real question in the end of this is, do we really have a choice? Because one of the key elements that was there was this idea of saying, well, if you are trusting the machine, you're not really trusting the machine. You are trusting the man that designed the machine. So, do we really have a choice in this? What are your opinions? Yes, no, partially? So do we really have a choice between, if we were today to decide we don't trust machines, can we do this?
I think the sentence that you said is not true, because you really not trust in the person who designed it. Because these days we can see that machines can do something that human cannot understand why the machine is this, like AI, very new technology. So basically, we are not trusting the person, we are really trusting that machines to do something.
I just amplify. You are saying we are now starting to see situations where the machine exhibits behavior that the humans don't understand. Because the machine is getting to be too complicated, and the humans don't, even the ones that designed the machine, don't have a full understanding of what the machine is doing. So we cannot say we're trusting the person that designed it. We really are trusting the machine. Okay, I take this.
Can I add,
yeah, sure.
One thing, the one situations that the people suggest for this is to add a judgment to the machine's behavior before taking the action.
Okay, so what do you mean in practice?
I mean, machines will take a decisions, and it will be judged after that decision.
Okay,
from
so
a human.
okay, so what you're saying is one solution to this situation where the machine has too complex of a behavior is to add one level of human supervision, of human judgment, which after the decision of the machine validates or refutes the decision of the machine. Okay. Yeah?
Just a comment on that, but then the human supervision becomes the bottleneck for the technological evolution, and at this point, like, we stop evolving.
So, and in this sense, you are doing the same thing here. I mean, I appreciate this. You are going back to the idea of, since I still don't trust the machine, I put a level of human judgment above. Right. So, other inputs, other ideas on this? Yeah.
There's formal proofing, and that way, if you prove that a machine works in a certain way, then there's no question of trusting because you know it's going to work correctly.
Right. So you can prove what is the behavior of a machine, and in this case, you will not have this doubt of what does the machine do. But I think his point is that of saying there are situations which are complex enough that you are not able to just provide a proof. Okay. Other ideas on this point of trusting the machine? Yeah?
I think just like machines have situations that we still don't have understand. In the past, nature had situations that we also didn't understand, so we just go along with it and as we try to understand it.
Right. So we don't need to have a full understanding of how a system works in order to use it or to be a cog in this machine. Indeed, this is the case for most people in the world. I mean, you cannot pretend that everybody that holds a phone into their hand knows how the phone works. I would argue that none of us here fully know how a phone works. If somebody can tell me that they perfectly know how a phone works to the smallest detail, I want to meet them and candidate them for a Turing Award, probably. Because these are complex systems. Okay.
Can I
Yeah.
We can see other questions which is superior to this. We can say that can we trust a complex system which is getting more complex on that?
So you're saying there is an abstraction that we can do, taking away the element of the machine and talking about complex systems in general. Can we trust these complex systems or not? And I think this is a very relevant observation because the reflection on machines is triggering reflections to other socio-technical systems in our world. Indeed, all of these studies are not done in the field of computing. They're done mostly in the field of socio-technical systems, which includes an element of computer science, an element of sociology, an element of economics, and an element of philosophy and policy. So these are all elements that fit to this agenda. Okay, other ideas on this? So I will give you one of my perspectives, which I think doesn't contradict any of these, but I just add one more element. So in the very first class of the one of the battles, we're talking about another book of Bruno Latour, which is the same of the actor network theory, which is Science in Action. And in Science in Action, in the introduction that I gave to you as a suggested reading, I think, to both courses, there is this idea. I'm not going to be the nasty person to ask you how many of you read it. It's fine if none of you did. It's okay. But there is this idea of the nesting of black boxes and opening the black box. Latour explains it talking about the discovery of the double helix of the DNA. And how the debate on whether the DNA was a double helix or a single helix was going on by the fact that the two teams of researchers were basing themselves on the product of the researcher before them. And they were able to open that black box, that paper, that procedure, but they were not able to open all the black boxes that came before that. So it's like a Russian doll system, a recursive system of black boxes. The point is, how deep can we go in the system of the black boxes before we are forced to give up. So, in a question of trust, we are facing the same dilemma. We are facing the dilemma of how much are we able individually and as a society to go deep into the system before we need to say, well, I trust that this system works the way it is supposed to. So this is an open question for a number of reasons. The main reason, which is unfortunately impossible to falsify, is when systems are too complex, we are unable to make sense of them. Well, that's quite trivial, right? But from emergent behaviors, which is what your colleague here is describing, the idea of a new behavior can appear that I did not program, to simple things like knowing how your washing machine works. I mean, at some point, you will need to stop in explaining your grandmother how the washing machine works, because you will need to start explaining to them how, induction in the sense of electrical induction works, alternate current, continuous current, and all of this. And it's never ending. So it's a series of black boxes. At some point, you will need to give to someone a black box and tell them, trust me, this works like this. Take this as a black box. But as technology advances, the base case of the black box becomes itself more complex, because the entangling increases, and at the end we will not take electricity for a black box, we will take a phone for a black box. And all sorts of emergent behaviors will start to appear from here. So, what can we do about this? Because we're seeing that this creates problems, right? And we said ethics is a common sense, it's a common behavior, socially defined, shared with people, it changes, but it's not written. We don't have a code of ethics. Well, some professions might have deontological codes, but there is no such thing as a universal code of ethics that I can open and algorithmically test, is this ethically right or wrong, right? So what can we do about this? How do we navigate this world, this complex world of conflicting ideas? Yes?
We have to accept that it is going to change by time and always adapt to the new standards.
So we have to accept that this is changing and we need to be ready to adapt. So, but while we are waiting for the change, we have some rules, right? What shape do these rules take? At least in Italy or in Europe.
Laws on the highest level.
Laws on the highest level, which is what is otherwise called policy. Okay? So, I want to spend a little bit more time towards the conclusion to talk about policy and a model of policy making that goes into this ethical direction, which is another paper which we will discuss briefly. So, first of all, do you know what is the difference between policy and politics? Can you try to give a definition of politics and a definition of policy? I don't want to give official ones because I always come up with bad ones, so I let you do this. So, policy or politics? Just raise your hands and start saying policy is or politics is. Let's see if we have someone else, just for the sake of diversification. Yeah.
Policy, I think, from my definition, is a series of rules that manage an aspect of a process or our life more in general. Okay,
so it's a set of rules that prescribe how a process or behavior should be done. How is it different from an algorithm?
Because algorithms define all the points.
Exactly.
Instead, the policy normally gives some free area or
Right. So algorithms define instructions and a sequence. And they prescribe how each step should be made. A policy is a higher level tool. It's something that gives you a guideline. Something that you should then implement in some other ways, through a law, through an algorithm, through a decision process, through a bag, whatever. But a policy gives you a higher level understanding. Okay, what about politics? What is politics? No need for a textbook definition. Yeah, now I have to.
Politics might be about what policies to create and what to cancel.
Okay, you're already getting towards the connection between policy and politics. I hold you there, but I come back to this in a second, because this is the next step. Yes?
I think that politics is the decision-making process that leads to a policy.
Okay, so don't look yet into the connection between the two. Okay? There is a connection, but let's go into this for at a second moment. So, what is politics in general? Because we can define politics independently from policy.
Discussion.
It's a process of discussion, okay, which does what?
To formalize the ethical contexts we are.
So it has an element of formalizing the ethical context of a society, okay, what else?
Evaluation, comparison.
Evaluation, comparison, so dialogue, what else? So let's say that politics in some way is a process that creates a dialogue in the society and enables this dialogue, enables it to work effectively. And then there is a link between policy and politics, which was what you were getting to, which was?
Politics is about what policies to make and what to cancel.
Politics defines what policy you create and how you implement it.
You can also cancel existing policies.
And you can also remove previous ones. It's the process also that governs the implementation, add, remove, the CRUD operations, let's say, on policy, on active policies. And you were saying also, from before, Notekeeper, you were saying that politics is, you are having this connection with the policy?
That is the decision-making process that leads to a policy.
That generates policies, yes, okay, very well. So, policy making and is the way in which we create the policy, and it's a process of politics. So, the example I want to give you today starts from the European Union and is about social innovation. Okay, this is a kind of hot keyword in policy, and there is a paper which you will be able to read, which will be provided, dating to 2011, where this trend first emerged. Okay, and the author, which was the professor of this course 3 years ago, was proposing that this would remain a hot topic, and indeed it remained. So up to today it still is. So the first process that I want to do is dissect with you social innovation. Okay? So what does this mean? Okay, there is an element of innovation. So we said innovation, the ability to change the truth value of a statement, so this transformative element. How does this map to the social part? So how can you make an innovation social? What does it mean to have a social innovation? Yes?
Change the common sense.
You change the common sense. You change the common sense, and you change a common sense which is shared with society. Can you give me some examples of this, everybody? Would you call Facebook a social innovation? Yes? Why?
Changes how people interact on a daily basis.
It changed how people interacted on a day-to-day basis. Okay. Other reasons why yes, why no? Other examples?
Before Facebook and social media, it was like a normal thing not to give your true identity over internet. And now we are doing exactly that.
Before Facebook, it was considered wise not to share your real identity over the internet. After Facebook, after social media, this is considered the norm. What else? So there is a transformative element here. Facebook or also non-Facebook? What about Capitano contro la Capitana? Sea-Watch. Okay, so you have a mission which, for the first time, is able to patrol independently the Mediterranean to rescue migrants going the Mediterranean route. Okay, they're only able to do this because it's we have the technology, we have the ships, we have the connections, and so on. Is this a social innovation? In the moment in which the government opens a call, let's say, that finances these type of missions with, I don't know, money, trivial. Is the government doing a policy of social innovation? Yes? No? Why? Or give me other examples if you think they're more interesting.
I think public transport is a social innovation.
Okay, public transport is a social innovation. Why?
Because before that, people probably walked or used to go by car, but public transportation brought society together in a way that valued mobility and provided it for all people around it.
Okay, so public transport is a social innovation because you are taking the good that was in the hands of the few, those that were able to afford a carriage or later a car, and putting it in the hands of everybody. So you are addressing a problem which everybody has, independent for the economic conditions, but through the means of public transport, now everyone has access to it. Yes, I think it's a good example.
I think the whole digitalizing thing, like ordering food on the internet or anything that's similar to this, it's a social innovation because we interact with people face to face less and less.
Okay, so you are saying that the digitalization, the moving of physical services and functions towards the internet is a social innovation because it's changing the way we interact. It's no longer a face-to-face interaction, but it's a mediated interaction through technology. Well, yes, it's for sure a change, and it's for sure addressing a social common sense. So in this sense, yes. No, okay, let's get more ideas.
Can I say something that is not implemented yet?
Yeah.
Like universal basic income.
Universal basic income can be seen as a source, as a form of social innovation. Why?
Because it will change dramatically the way we approach the life, let's say.
Because it will change drastically the way we approach life. Because some things which before we had to, we are maybe familiar with Maslow's pyramid of needs. The lower levels, so the food and shelter, will be covered by the universal basic income theory. So it will change the way we interact, we live our lives. Okay, one more example. The digitalization as a process in general, giving access to people to the internet, to be able to express their voice. It's also a social innovation. Because people that were before unable to be heard now maybe have, I don't know, I take the most trivial example, an email address of the comune to which they can write. The mailing system, even more trivially, where I as a normal citizen can write to the higher levels of society or of decision making, is a form of social innovation. So in this article there are three views that the author proposes that address the idea of social innovation. I want to explain them to you briefly and get some examples. So the first is the so-called narrow view. By this view, a social innovation is an innovation that affects a socially vulnerable segment of the population and tries to improve their life. So you see there is an ethically positive element here. We're not saying something that addresses the vulnerable segments and tries to put them even deeper, but tries to help. Okay? You will see this as a transversal, but this is a narrow view. So strictly sticking to the definition, I try to change the common sense in a positive way. Can you give me examples of this? Actions of social innovation that address vulnerable parts of the population? Yeah?
Bill Gates Foundation and distributing quality vaccines.
Yeah, the Bill Gates Foundation that distributes, I don't know, clear water for most people. For sure, it's an action of, in some sense, social innovation. Now I have a cheap way to purify water in all over the world. And I address vulnerable people, those that don't have water. Okay, what else? Yeah?
These fundraising websites.
Platforms of fundraising, where people are unable to do something and they ask for help from their community, in some sense is a narrow view of social innovation. Yes, there was somebody else in the back?
Down there.
Down there. Who was down there? Oh, yeah. Sorry? Okay, this is the universal basic income, again. But it's a different way of universal basic income. You're thinking about that basic income, which only addresses people that don't have a job, for example. So this, in some sense, is also a way of addressing a small part of the population. Yes. Other ideas? Even from the traditional, good old world that is outside the internet. Yeah?
Building accessible bus stops.
Yeah, building accessible infrastructure. This addresses people that are unable to use this. So you are making this, by the way, on accessibility there would be a lot to talk about. When people think about accessibility, they think about making people with wheelchairs access something more nicely. This is absolutely reductive, because it turns out that accessibility is much more than this. Accessibility is about making something more accessible for everyone, not just with people with disabilities. And usually, making it something more accessible for people with disability comes as a nice side effect. But yes, accessibility is a clear example of narrow view in most cases. So you're seeing precise examples. You're seeing examples of, I have a problem of a vulnerable segment, I solve it. The curb cuts. You know what they are? The curb is the thing that goes on the side of the street. The cuts are those things that go with a small ledge like this. This makes it more accessible for people that have movement impairments. But if you are on a bicycle, or indeed on foot, or on crutches, or you are old, or you are young but don't want to do steps because you're not in the gym, or literally anybody, you will still appreciate it. Something that is useful also for you. A second approach is the one of the so-called societal challenges. So these are challenges that affect everybody independently from whether they are part of a vulnerable segment of the population or a privileged one. Can you think of some of these? Of societal challenges? Yes?
Vaccination.
Vaccination, health, for sure. What else? Yeah?
Climate change.
Climate change. What else?
Colonization of other planets.
Colonization of other planets. But also the access to digital technology. Now is something that doesn't just affect the privileged population. It indirectly affects also the poor. How we extract raw materials. Okay? So you can look at these very nicely. Food or energy. So you can look at these very nicely by going to any big policy-making institute, the European Commission, the UN, whatever, and you can look at what they list as societal challenges. So, can you think of also transportation, mobility is a societal challenge. Everybody needs to move from one point to another at some point in their lives. So, can you think of innovations that address societal challenges?
Concerning the challenge of educating population, innovations like Coursera and free access.
Okay, so online learning is a tool that can address, is a social innovation in the sense that it addresses the universal challenge of educating a population. Yeah, I agree with this. Other ideas? Also going through, well, I mean, in this sense, the example of the buses, public transport, is something that solves the societal challenges, or aims at solving the societal challenge of mobility. Other ideas? Innovations that solve, for example, the societal challenge of climate change? Yeah?
Nuclear fusion?
Yeah, I mean, if we have a nuclear fusion, that's for sure going to solve the societal challenge of energy. Many ways. Okay. Yeah?
Organizations like World Health Organization.
Yeah. Big organization like the World Health Organization aim at addressing the societal challenge of health with a number of different actions. Okay. So, in this approach, we're addressing macro scale problems. And then there is a third approach, which is that of systemic transformations. So here, the idea is to go even more than just addressing the societal challenge. The idea is of empowering the population to address it. To address a problem which can be either macro or micro, but to empower the people to let them do this. Can you think of these types of policy?
Universal basic income.
Universal basic income. Because in this sense, you are not just you're not just helping the poor. You're giving them a tool, hopefully, that will allow them to kickstart themselves more. So in this sense, it's a tool of empowerment. So this view of systemic transformation, you can also see it as a view of empowerment. Other societal transformations? Well, voting rights are very much in this direction. You're empowering a population which before did not have voting rights to take the matter into their hands. So you're still changing the common sense, you're still doing social innovation, but you're doing this by empowering a segment of the population which is not necessarily weaker, but maybe is misrepresented. Sorry?
Women emancipation.
Women emancipation.
Where women are now allowed to do the same things, men are doing more or less the same, and they have the same platform to express themselves.
Exactly. So, emancipation not just of women, but of any vulnerable or even of any segment of society represents a way through which I can empower some actors to take control even of the policy-making process itself.
Awareness campaigns.
Awareness campaigns about health, about anything, are also a matter of societal transformations. I empower the people to take actions in their own hands. Okay, so we've seen some of these examples, some of these applications. The last one I want to introduce, but maybe actually Andrea will introduce better than me, is the idea of CSR, of corporate social responsibility.
I think they can work on that.
Okay.
So, corporate social responsibility. Who of you ever heard this word? Just heard. Not the majority, so not a lot of people. And those of you who raised their hands, a brief idea, we work a bit on it, on what is corporate social responsibility, or CSR. I saw some raised hands. Well, please. Yeah, you. Sorry.
For me, corporate social responsibility, these are the things we do in order that will benefit the society. An example, like in my country, we have marathons, like where we collect money, not necessarily to benefit the company, like MTN itself, but to build dams, build schools, health networks for the community.
Perfect.
So people come together for a global cause or a normal cause of giving back to the community.
Okay, an example was this. You also raise your hand, please.
I was going to say pretty much the same, that the corporations do something to give back to the community that supports them.
Okay, perfect. Other points on this? Well, it was said quite a lot, please.
I think the government has imposes on the companies that it's mandatory for the companies to do that. I mean, as a part of their income, it's mandatory for the companies to do some social work. So
Social action.
it's not like they're doing. I think.
Okay. It's not that they do it on purpose or because they are willing to, but because they are also forced. So, in general, just to give a definition on this, for not going too long, is that this is related to companies, first of all. So companies, organizations, they can be even public companies. They need to establish a policy, they need or they are liking to have, because there are some countries where corporate social responsibility is mandatory, there are other countries where these policies are not so well in place. But these are policies. As the state set out these policies, also the companies set out their policies in order to become socially conscious, socially, I would say, active. And this code of conduct is a sort of code of conduct is the corporate social responsibility. So the big corporation, corporate stands for corporation, now also startups are more and more working on this, but corporation define some rules that should work within the company so that they behave more socially in a compatible way with social rules, with ethics, and with social responsibility. That's in brief what is corporate social responsibility. Among these, there are examples like your colleague was saying. For example, among my rules, there is also that once per year, I also organize a marathon with all my employees, but also all the other people that wants to join. We collect money, and we give this money to public welfare. So this is, in brief, what corporate social responsibility. It is a trend that is increasing in importance, because the big corporation, usually they tend to have more and more close ties with politicians, so they get some rules which try to support them. But on the other hand, they try to implement such CSR policies, so to try to be seen as behaving good. That maybe they are not behaving so good, but this is in the way of behaving better, let's say.
So this, in some sense, then connects, let's say, all of the discussion that we had now, also to the world of business, where this policy making is not just a matter of high-level policy making at an EU level, but it also becomes a matter of policy making at a corporate level, at a business level. And actually, one of the main takeaways of this type of discussion is also that these problems, these concerns are nowadays impossible to ignore and impossible to dismiss, because they are becoming mandatory. When you fill any relatively big EU project application, they will ask you what is the social impact of your project, even if you're doing R&D. So these agendas, social agendas, but also ethical agendas, are becoming transversal to the domain of innovation, entrepreneurship, business, and any action that you want to do. And they are there whether you make a startup, whether you make your new technology, whether you work in a university, or you work with a company. One way or another, they appear. Okay? So, we are quite right on time. We even have time for questions. For more questions, because we had a lot of questions. Okay, otherwise, I would propose this. We give you the next steps. I would ask the IND Basics to stop for 2 minutes, and then we say ciao. Okay? So, next steps. It's easy for both classes. Next Wednesday, 2:30 in your respective class, there are battles. Okay? And it's ironically enough Battle 4 and Battle 4. I also put a spoiler on the theme of the battles. And for the IBICT, next Wednesday, after the class, we will have the battle preparation. Okay? Battle 6. Battle 6 preparation. Okay, aside from this, I would say IBICT can go. Ciao. IND Basics, please stay here just 1 minute. Okay?